Crew often find themselves in difficult situations when they're in unfamiliar places, or even in places that they think they know. We can be guilty of carrying a false sense of security, an attitude that the world is perhaps a little safer than it really is, simply because so often it just appears that way. And last month, we told you a story about one unfortunate soul who found himself running from danger. A story that thankfully ended well, but could very easily have gone in a very different direction. Well, today's story carries a similar message. It's one about not being naive, about taking that extra bit of care when you're out there, far from home and out of your comfort zone. Because for today's subject, things didn't end so well. The difference with this one, though, is that while our sympathy lies firmly with him and his family for everything that they went through, it later emerged that the events leading up to what happened were perhaps not quite as they were first reported. And it's worth saying also that while the story originally did make the news, the outcome and the specific details were never made public. Those bits came to us through Galley FM, so read between the lines if you wish. But remember that here on the Red Eye, it's often the parts that sound the hardest to believe, which turn out to be true. Doors to armed and cross-check.
Come fly, the Red Eye! Whoa!
Welcome aboard the Red Eye. Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The dull aching inside his skull that had lingered since he woke had finally begun to lift, John realised with a faint smile as he crossed the car park towards the supermarket. The sun was shining, the sky a flawless blue, not a cloud anywhere above him. And the air, it felt so clean, despite the busy city around him, like every breath scrubbed something out of him. He was starting to feel okay. Maybe even good, though perhaps it was too soon for that. It had been a heavy night, like it always was here in Brazil. The place where the steak was cheaper than a fast food burger at home, and the cocktails never stopped flowing. And you always knew that, no matter how hard you tried not to get carried away, you would. And the next morning, you would pay for that lack of self-control. Like he had, an hour ago, when he'd woken dry-mouthed and foggy-headed. The reason he'd chosen to ignore security protocols and step outside of the gated complex they stayed in, he'd needed the brisk walk, the fresh air in his lungs, and now he was going to go buy some fresh-pressed juice and something healthy to eat to cleanse himself before he did it all again tonight. His stomach turned at the thought of it, but it had to be done. He didn't fly to South America and not make the most of every minute. "Excuse me." A woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see a pretty face smiling back at him, one hand on her trolley and the other raised in the air, as if she were asking a question in class. He tilted his head in response, a small, polite smile forming. "Could you please help me with my bags? They are very heavy." John paused for a second. He'd never been asked to help load someone's car before, but she was petite, he noticed, and perhaps she had some issue that he couldn't see. Whatever the reason, she'd asked for help, and he'd always been the kind of person who said yes, wherever he was in the world. "Of course," he said, stepping forward to take hold of the trolley. "Where's your car?" She turned immediately, already moving. "All the way in the back," she said, without so much as looking back. John watched as she walked quickly off. It was a big car park, and he kind of wished she'd said it was nearby, but he thought as he gave the trolley a sharp push to get it moving, he couldn't change his mind now. She was already 5 steps ahead of him. He scanned left and right as he caught her up, aware that he stood out, that despite his basic t-shirts and shorts, he looked like he didn't belong there. He wasn't naive, and even though he made this walk regularly, he always made sure he had his wits about him. So why, he would wonder later, when he was giving his statement, Didn't he see what happened next coming? Why hadn't he paid attention to the shift in her energy? Questioned why she'd parked so far away when there were plenty of spaces closer by? Why hadn't he known, when she'd finally turned and the smile was no longer on her face, when her eyes had drifted behind him, that they were there, and just about to pounce? The shove came first. Hard and sudden, enough to knock him off balance, and then his arm was wrenched up behind his back. Pain exploded through his shoulder, and before he could think, before he could even understand what was happening, he was driven forward, head first into the open back of the car. No one spoke. The only noises were coming from him, he realised, as he yelled to relieve the pain from his arms being bent at angles that they weren't supposed to go. And then, just as quickly, he was upright in the middle of the back seat. His heart slammed against his ribs, adrenaline flooding through him so fast it made him lightheaded. A man sat on either side, their bodies close, solid and pressing against him. One of them held a gun. The woman was in the front passenger seat now, and to her side the driver stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, expression empty as the car pulled away. "What's going on?" he asked eventually when he finally could speak. His throat was dry, the words catching as they left him, but he needed to know. He glanced either side, barely turning his head, too afraid to make eye contact, scared of what he might see reflected back at him. Nobody replied. And for the next 25 minutes, no one spoke to him at all. John didn't ask again. Everything he thought he understood about what was happening was being written by his own mind, because the truth was, he knew nothing. Nothing. Apart from the fact that he was terrified. At first, he tried to track the journey. Left turn, highway, speed bumps, traffic lights. But after they pulled the hood over his head, something rough and stale-smelling that tightened around his face, direction became meaningless. All he knew after that was motion. Heat, the smell of sweat and cigarette smoke, and the constant pressure of the men beside him. When the car finally stopped, John had almost no sense of how long they'd been driving, although he would later guess at 25 minutes or thereabouts. The hood was yanked off suddenly, and for a second, he saw nothing but white light as his eyes struggled to focus. Then the house slowly emerged from the blur. It sat behind a rusted metal gate that hung slightly crooked on its runners. A single-story concrete box crouched behind it, paint peeling from the walls. The windows were covered with metal burglar bars, some rusted through at the corners. The street outside was uneven dirt and broken tarmac. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. Music drifted from another house nearby, a low bass, muffled voices, even laughter. Life was carrying on. But he knew instinctively that nobody here was coming to help him. Inside the house, he was shoved roughly forward, past a small kitchen and into a room at the back. It was sparsely furnished, the air thick with stale cigar smoke. Empty glasses and overflowing ashtrays littered a low table pushed against one wall, while the tiled floor beneath his feet was cracked and uneven, several pieces missing entirely. His instinct to run, even to defend himself, was gone. Instead, all he could think was, just do what they say, give them what they want, and survive. It was the only strategy that might work. Every other option ended with him dead in the ground. Someone shoved him again, steering him towards a single wooden chair positioned on the far side of the room. He understood immediately what they wanted. Sit. John lowered himself into it, feeling a hand clamp down on each shoulder, forcing him hard into the seat until the wood creaked beneath his weight. A man he hadn't seen before stepped forward now and held out his hand. "Your phone." With trembling fingers, John dug into his pocket and pulled it out. "Wallet." He hesitated just for a moment, but it was long enough. The punch crashed into his face with the force of a freight train, snapping his head sideways so violently that lights burst across his vision. "I said wallet," the man repeated, his voice flat now, angry and impatient. John cupped his nose instinctively as he reached back into his pocket. Blood was already spilling between his fingers, trickling over his lips and into his mouth. There was no money in his wallet. Nothing of value, really. Why had he even hesitated? He berated himself immediately. He wouldn't do that again. But he did. Every time they pulled out another card and demanded he open the banking app on his phone, he hesitated. He didn't know why. It wasn't even resistance. Barely more than a split second while his brain tried to catch up with what they wanted from him, but every hesitation failed him. Open the app. Bang. Transfer the money. Whack. Request an increase to your credit limit. Kick. The violence became part of the process. It was automatic and unavoidable, no matter how quickly he did what they asked. By the time they had emptied his current account and moved onto his credit cards, every bone in his body screamed in pain. His ribs burned every time he breathed, and one eye was beginning to swell shut. Several times he tried to leave his body mentally, to retreat somewhere deep inside his own head where none of this could reach him. But they never left him alone long enough to disappear completely. He wasn't even stalling. He was just trying to think. Occasionally, they left the room for a few minutes at a time, but they never left him alone completely. Someone always remained behind, watching him. Why? He didn't know. He hurt too much to run. And even if he could, where would he go? The windows had metal bars bolted across them. The door could be locked from the outside. Then they would return. Sometimes the faces were different, but every time they came back, they had another way of getting money from him. Apply for a loan. Transfer savings. The ISA they'd spotted on his banking app. Increase the limits on his credit cards, and each time they moved the money immediately, draining him of every single penny they could reach. John sat hunched forward now, struggling to breathe, still winded from the last blow. His ribs were definitely broken. Every breath felt sharp and shallow. Someone suddenly held his phone inches from his face, waiting for him to unlock it again. Then a voice spoke beside him. "Which number is your wife's?" John's blood ran cold. I don't... The kick slammed into him with such force that it sent him crashing sideways out of the chair. He hit the floor hard. Instinct took over immediately. He curled into the fetal position, arms over his head as blows rained down on him from every direction. Sharp bursts of pain detonating through ribs, back, shoulders, and for a moment, through the agony, he genuinely thought it was over. That this was the point where his body, the body he had lived inside for more than 40 years, had finally reached its limit. That it couldn't take any more. And strangely, the realization brought a flicker of relief. The torture that had been going on for hours was finally ending, even if his life was ending with it. But it wasn't over. Hands grabbed him beneath the arms and hauled him violently upright again, dragging him back into the chair. Pain roared through him instantly, hot and searing, every nerve in his body screaming to remind him that he was still alive. And things were about to get even worse. Because what happened next was torture aimed not at his body, but at the last untouched part of him. His soul.
Oh, please. No, please don't.
Juliet's sobs crackling through the speaker of the phone were the saddest sound he had ever heard. She tried to reason with them, tried to negotiate, tried the same desperate tactics he himself had already failed with hours earlier. And every time she hesitated, every time she said no, every time she pleaded that there wasn't anything left, they punished her by hurting him, making sure she could hear him scream. It continued until there was simply nothing left to take. And he couldn't scream anymore. There were no more accounts, no more credit cards, no more money his wife could somehow conjure into existence. Only then did it stop. And somewhere along the line, they loaded him back into the car, drove him back to the same place they had abducted him from, and dumped him onto the ground like discarded rubbish. When John finally heard the sirens in the distance, heard the voices of the people trying to help him, he found himself drifting in and out of consciousness, trying to remember how he had got there. What had he done that had led him to being here? What had he done to deserve this? Months later, the security office, airline headquarters. Hey, buddy, what's the latest? Dave looked up from behind his desk and rolled his eyes tiredly. Don't ask. Ivan frowned. Well, have they caught the culprits yet? Oh, yes, Dave replied. Oh, that's good though, right? Dave gave a humourless shrug. Yes and no. Ivan pulled out a chair and sat opposite him, steepling his fingers together as he studied his colleague's face. The airline security department was small and tight-knit. After years spent dealing with everything from disruptive passengers to crew assaults overseas, there wasn't much they kept from one another. Which was exactly why Dave's reaction bothered him. What's happened? Ivan asked carefully. Dave rubbed a hand across his mouth before answering. John's flying back next month. That's good news. Another shrug. Depends on how you look at it. Ivan's brow furrowed deeper. Ever since the kidnapping, Dave had practically lived inside the investigation. Endless calls with Brazilian police, private security contractors, embassy officials, reviewing hotel security, rewriting layover protocols, trying to make sure nothing like that could ever happen again. The whole airline had rallied around John after the attack. They'd had fundraisers and collections. Crew had donated leave days and money to help him recover what he'd lost. So, what had changed? Will they go to court? Ivan asked. A long, slow breath escaped Dave's mouth. Then silently, he reached over and turned his monitor around. It took Ivan a moment to process what he was seeing. A series of photos on the screen in front of him. A dimly lit hotel room. A bedside lamp casting a soft amber glow across tangled white sheets. Wine bottles on the table behind him. And John, half dressed in some photos, completely naked in others. Just like the woman in the photos with him. He looked like he was having the time of his life. Dave clicked through the photos in silence, the situation becoming clearer with each one. Ivan stared at the screen, struggling to connect the man in the photographs with the broken pilot they'd all visited in hospital. Jesus, he muttered. Dave pointed quietly towards the corner of one image. Check the timestamp. Ivan leaned closer, squinting slightly. The date was the night before the kidnapping. Slowly, Dave opened another folder, and police mugshots filled the screen. Men first, then finally, a woman. A pretty face, even without makeup, with her hair tied back and a blank expression staring into the camera. Recognize her? Dave asked quietly. Ivan blinked, mentally piecing everything together. He knew her. Dave nodded once. Looks that way. Silence hung between them for several seconds. He was with a prostitute, Ivan said eventually, the dots finally connected. According to local police, yes. Ivan leaned back slowly in his chair, still staring at the monitor. And they blackmailed him with the photos. Dave rubbed tiredly at his face. That's the theory. He tells her he's a pilot. She realises he's got money. She calls the gang, and from there it spirals. He paused briefly. It doesn't mean they didn't torture him. It doesn't mean what happened wasn't horrific. Ivan nodded slowly. But the shopping story, he said quietly. Dave gave a faint, exhausted shake of the head. It probably never happened. Ivan let out a long, low whistle. They'd all heard the story, read the statements, how he'd been hungover and needed fresh air to clear his head, how he'd been enjoying the morning and was going to go buy some juice when the woman who had asked him for help with her bags. It was believable. It was detailed and elaborate, rehearsed even, like he'd been replaying it in his mind so that he didn't miss anything out. But perhaps, Ivan mused, he'd been telling it to himself over and over, thinking that if he repeated it enough, it would eventually feel true. And no one had questioned it. Poor bloke won't want this getting out, he muttered. And to be fair, I reckon he's probably learned his lesson. Dave nodded slowly. He agreed with every word. That was the problem with the truth, though. It had a habit of catching up with you eventually. For 6 months, everyone at the airline had believed John had simply been trying to help someone. The decent pilot in the wrong place at the wrong time. A good man. And his wife, caught in something horrific. And in many ways, he still was. But now they knew what had really happened. That he had willingly put himself in that position in the first place by doing something he shouldn't have. Something stupid, and not just in leaving the compound and walking to the supermarket. That the story everyone had repeated in crew rooms and on jump seats wasn't quite true. Dave stared at the photographs on the monitor. John laughing, naked bodies, the kind of photographs that were never meant to be seen by anyone but the people in them. How long? Ivan said quietly, almost to himself, before everyone else finds out too. Dave didn't answer, because they both already knew. It wouldn't come from them, but it would come from somewhere. Someone would know someone who knew someone, and the true story would make Galley FM in no time. Because, in aviation, secrets travelled faster than planes.
The Red Eye podcast is written by Kaylie Kay, narrated and produced by me, Ali Murphy. These stories are based on true events, but certain details, characters, and timelines have been altered to protect the innocent. Visit our website, theredeyepod.com, to subscribe to our newsletter and to find out details on how you can contribute your story for us to turn into an episode. If you enjoyed listening to our stories, please like, subscribe, and review. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Red Eye podcast. You guys are why we do this. We love the stories that you have, and we love telling you the stories that people share with us. To help us reach more people and get the podcast really out there, we would really appreciate it if you left a review. It just helps our podcast be a little bit more visible. Thank you.